there is in the Ohio Senate. It's SCR 7, and I'm proud to say I initiated that legislation to reinitiate states' rights. Unfortunately, when we passed it out of the Senate, it was a party line vote. 17 Republicans voted to recognize your 10th Amendment rights, but 12 Democrats voted not to recognize the 10th Amendment rights of the people of Ohio. And the problem is we're stuck in the Ohio House, so everybody here today needs to write their state representative and the Speaker of the House and tell them we want them to vote on SCR 7. We want to reestablish our rights as Ohioans and as a state of Ohio under the 10th Amendment.
Representative Hood, if the legislation passed, if the legislation passed, what would be the practical effect of this? I mean, the good senator is not asking the state of Ohio to nullify the income tax. Boy, that's a good one, isn't it? Starve the federal government out of existence. I mean, all he's asking them to do is to recognize the existence of the 10th Amendment, which is part of the document on which they took an oath, and to recognize the sovereignty of Ohio. How could anybody vote against that?
It's amazing to me that all you have to do is reaffirm the Constitution and vote for this resolution. It's a very easy vote. It's a very up and down straight vote. But the problem with state legislators is, and I served in the Ohio legislature for 8 years, the problem with the state legislature is they want the bribe money from the federal government, okay? In order to circumvent the 10th Amendment, they want the bribe money from the federal government. And so when the federal government, they come in and they ask the state to lie down. So you know what that makes the state, don't you?
Yeah. When the federal government goes, well, I mean, we all know what's happening. I mean, the reason we all had a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit is not because miraculously all 50 states said you have to waste gas and waste time by driving at 55 miles an hour, but the federal government said, here's a couple of $100 million to repave your highways, Sheriff Mack. Yeah. Take the money, but take the strings, and the strings are the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. One state said, we want the money and no strings. The state is South Dakota. South Dakota sued the federal government, and South Dakota lost in an opinion written by the late Chief Justice Rehnquist, who basically said, if you want the money, take the strings. But the strings are an utter assault, are they not, on the sovereignty of the states?
Well, they are. And now even Oklahoma, I just spoke at the Oklahoma State Legislature, and there's actually a bill there being proposed that if the federal government threatens to withhold federal funds, that the state of Oklahoma will take over all collection within the state of all federal taxes and send to Washington what they think they need. And that'll be the richest state. The first state legislature that has the guts to do that will be the richest state in the union.
Well, Maurice, we all know from the first year of constitutional law in a horrible case called McCullough against Maryland that the states can't tax federal property. But could you imagine what would happen if one state tried? Yeah. Do you think they'd get away with it? Do you think that this 200-year-old awful precedent might be reversed if it appears to be that this is what the people want?
Well, the state of Utah is currently trying to repossess federal property through eminent domain, which is kind of an ironic turn of the tables that we should all keep an eye on. But, you know, one of the interesting things after listening to the fact that there was a 17-12 vote in the Ohio legislature on whether to affirm the Constitution, which is remarkably close, is that we all have to remember that we don't need the politicians necessarily in order to effectuate freedom. Right. And that's because the free market movement 2.0 is all about us.
But can I tell you how blue I am when I see how vast the federal government's powers are and how they have seduced even those of us with the best intentions. This legislation that we're talking about, we will give you $100 million to pave your highways if you will reduce the speed limit to 55, was not signed by Jimmy Carter or by Bill Clinton. It was signed by that left-wing radical Ronald Reagan. Yeah. I'm being sarcastic about calling him a left-wing radical, is there no limit to the seduction of federal powers when even the president in the post-World War II era who most talked about federalism, who most preached the sovereignty of the states, Sheriff Mack, when even he fell for this?
Well, he did, and it's kind of sad. But he also said, and I'll never forget it, government isn't the solution to the problem. Government is the problem, and we've seen that come to fruition, and he was absolutely correct. And let me say that Tim reminded me of it, and I'll just tell every one of you this. You're the hope. You give me hope, because this is the generation that's going to make America great, and you are it. Now, the most important thing that your legislature and your sheriffs can do for you is to protect you from federal tyranny. That's the most important thing they can do.
We had a case in New Jersey when I was on the bench. New Jersey has what's called blue laws, which prohibit certain commercial activity on Sundays. And a lawyer who's no longer with us was sitting in his office on a Sunday when the police knocked on the door and arrested him for practicing law on a Sunday. Now, the case was not assigned to me. Oh, how I had wished that case had been assigned to me. But when he was standing before one of my colleagues who said to him, "And what were you doing in your office on a Sunday afternoon when the police knocked?" Answer, "I was reading the Constitution." Senator, how low have we gone if the Senate of the state of Ohio is afraid to vote in favor of a piece of legislation reaffirming the Constitution?
It defies logic. I mean, this is the basic document by which our country was formed. It is the document that protects our freedoms. You know, the founding fathers 230 years ago didn't know we were going to have Twitter and mobile phones, but they understood people's feelings and the nature of people, and they knew that the arrogance of power, if it was consolidated in one place, would be a problem. And so they gave us the 10th Amendment to give that wonderful balance, to give us our states' rights, to protect ourselves against, having an overuse of abuse of power in Washington. And it's a sad day when a third of the Ohio Senate won't vote for it, but it's a Saturday when you can't get the Ohio House to even hold a hearing on it. And as of right now, I still haven't got a hearing on SCR 7 in the Ohio House, which is a simple hearing to uphold the rights of the people of this state.
Maurice, let's say his legislation passes, and let's say the governor of this state signs that legislation into law. What do you think? I guess it wouldn't be the present governor, but what will happen if the legislature of the state of Ohio says to Washington, D.C., you are not going to force the people in Ohio to buy health care against their will?
Yeah.